The following is a program of the Santa Barbara County Education Office. To learn more, visit sbceo.org.
Hi, I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools. I am so delighted to welcome our guest today, the Executive Director for Just Communities Central Coast, Jarrod Schwartz. Jarrod, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
it's good to be here.
Really great that you're here. Can't wait to hear and share all that you're doing for the community in different entities, different organizations and individuals. You're doing a lot.
We are.
Yes, you are, and can't wait to hear and have you share more about them. But before we dive into that world, let's talk about you as a child growing up. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school, elementary school, and all of that?
Yeah, so I grew up on the East Coast in a suburb of Baltimore, Maryland, and it was a Jewish community. I grew up going to elementary school at the local public school, but then something happened as we were kind of getting up in upper elementary school, and my parents were really no longer satisfied with the school system and ended up moving me to a private school in 7th grade, and so kind of went 7th through 12th at a kind of one of those East Coast private schools, and it was a pretty interesting experience, kind of going from being a straight A student at the public school with very little effort to all of a sudden going into a very rigorous environment and struggling academically for the first year. But it definitely taught me a lot about what rigor looks like in academic environments, and it showed me a lot in terms of the kinds of resources that school had that really every school should have, but many of our local public schools didn't have at that time.
Right. So then you went off to college. Tell us about which college you attended, your major, and career aspirations at that time.
Well, so I went to Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Started out in the business school because growing up, I could be either a doctor, a lawyer, or a business person. That was what my parents talked
defined,
about. Exactly.
Yes.
And I knew early on that I didn't want to have anything to do with medicine or law. So I was like, oh, my dad's in business, my uncle's in business. I guess I'll go into business too. And after about 3 weeks of business school classes, I knew that wasn't for me.
Okay.
So I switched out at the first chance I got, became an English major, and my goal at the time was to teach high school English. I ended up getting kind of sidetracked through a lot of the volunteer opportunities that I did in college. I got involved with activism, especially environmental activism, and then social justice work, and then a lot of working with schools, but from the outside as working for nonprofits. And it was really that kind of made me go in a little bit of a zigzag in terms of my career, and I never ended up in the classroom, but have ever since then been involved with education.
And you found yourself really working with nonprofits, many. I mean, Just Communities is one now that you've been with for quite some time, but there have been others before. So you talked a little bit about the work that you did as I think a college student, perhaps right after college too, that really impacted your decision to move to nonprofit work. So say a little bit more, if you wouldn't mind, about the kinds of activities that you were involved in then, and then some of the activities that you found yourself in as a profession.
Yeah, so really the first big thing that I did working for a nonprofit was during college and after college, working for an environmental education organization, and we would develop curriculum and train teachers on how to use the environment as kind of a real-world learning lab for whatever subjects they were teaching. And it was kind of through that and through some student observation I did while in college that I started to really get a little frustrated with the school system and realized that this institution that was responsible for learning and for making learning happen for students really struggled to learn itself, that schools had trouble learning and therefore improving. And so I kind of went through this cycle of, well, the problem is the curriculum. And then the more I was out there doing work on curriculum development, I was like, there's tons of great curriculum out there. And then I was like, oh, the problem must be the teachers. And the more teacher trainings we were doing, it's like, there are some phenomenal teachers out there. And so it really kind of brought me to this idea of, it's more the system itself. And if we're going to improve our schools, I need to really understand systems change, and we as a society need to become better at systems change. And so that's really what kind of my career path. I really focus in on social justice issues. I kind of started doing that in the early 90s, working with schools starting from about 1992 on around social justice issues, but doing it through a lens of how do we help schools learn and improve and change in ways that create and expand opportunity for all students.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really great. And then when you had those lessons along the way, somehow you found yourself at Just Communities, but it wasn't just a straight path there. So what were some of the stepping stones along the way to get to Just Communities in terms of some of the nonprofits you've worked with?
Yeah, so Just Communities used to be part of a national organization called, well, originally in 1927 it was established as the National Conference of Christians and Jews. Then in the mid-90s became the National Conference for Community and Justice. I started volunteering for them while in college in 1992, doing this kind of week-long residential summer camp for high school students on social justice and diversity. And I loved it. It transformed my own life, my own perspective on things. I had kind of grown up with the belief that this was the United States of America. Anybody who worked hard could achieve. If you didn't achieve, it was your own fault. You just didn't work hard enough, didn't care, didn't have good family values. And it was kind of through my college experience and that early volunteering that I started to realize, no, there's real structural and systemic barriers for people of color, for women, for people from working class and people growing up in poverty, for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered individuals. And it was a real shift for me that kind of opened up my eyes. And so I stayed volunteering, eventually got a job with the NCCJ in St. Louis, running their youth programs, then eventually becoming their program director. And then they hired me to come out to the Central Coast and start a new office of NCCJ here in Santa Barbara.
One of the other things I think is impactful is your family. You have two wonderful daughters, twins. You have a wife who works in nonprofits as well, and I know I've heard you talk about their impact and influence on the work that you're doing. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I have an incredible family. It's great to kind of have a side outside of work. Elena and I have been together now 25 years. Elena Walczak is the CEO of Calm, another incredible organization in our community. And it was interesting, one of the things that she taught me early on, I kind of got into the nonprofit sector, kind of like I said, it was more issue-oriented rather than thinking of the nonprofit world as my career path.
Right.
But she went to graduate school in philanthropic studies. And it was kind of through her that I started to realize that nonprofits themselves actually have a really critical role in our society, that you've got the public sector of government, and that plays an important role. You've got the corporate sector of business that plays an important role. And growing up, I thought that's kind of all there was, and nonprofits were just kind of off on the side doing their thing. But she helped me really learn that the nonprofits actually play a kind of a key role in kind of creating this tripod in our society that really helps make sure that everyone's needs are addressed. And so that was really it was through her was the first time I started to think about a career in the nonprofit world as opposed to I just happen to be working for an organization that doesn't have shareholders and make profits.
Right.
So that was a really it was a cool kind of learning as she was learning and I was kind of learning beside her. And then in terms of my daughters, I have 7-year-old twin girls, and watching them grow and develop has been transformative for me as well. But it's also shown me something in terms of they have, for the most part, every opportunity a child could want or need to succeed. And yet parenting is really hard. But not every child has the kinds of opportunities they have.
Right.
And it's hard to really imagine and fully comprehend just what it would be like to parent with so many of the obstacles and challenges that we don't face.
Thank you for sharing that. It talks a lot about the intentionality regarding nonprofit work, but also, parenting and being somebody who can provide opportunities for our youth, your kids, but the youth, and what does it mean to have opportunities, and what does it mean to maybe not have as many opportunities, or have an adult who's really advocating for the children. And so much of all of that is wrapped up in who you are in terms of what you do as an executive director for Just Communities. Let's talk a little bit about the Just Communities mission statement. I have it right here. An equitable and inclusive Central Coast. This is the vision statement. An equitable and inclusive Central Coast where all people are connected, respected, and valued. I'm sure you can say that frontwards and backwards and all of that. Say what that means, that vision means to you when you hear that back, and what you do towards that vision.
Yeah. For us, what it really means is that we have a Central Coast in which everyone feels a connection to other people, feels a connection to their community, feels a connection to something bigger than themselves, and feels a part, truly a part of their community. I think so often there's so many people who are really kind of held at arm's length from our community, denied the kinds of opportunities that everyone should have in our society. So that's a piece of it, that everyone is connected and that everyone really does feel valued, feels like the life they live has value, that the person they are has value, that their identities have value in our world. And again, where there's kind of a basic level of respect for all people and for people from all different backgrounds. And so that's what our work is trying to, one, help people understand when and where that doesn't exist and for whom that doesn't exist, and then trying to shift the culture of our schools, of our nonprofit organizations, of government agencies to make sure that we are truly including, valuing, and respecting everyone who lives in the Central Coast.
The work that you do, Jarrod, it can be very difficult because you're revealing, in some cases, things that people hadn't thought of before about themselves. And so you're working with a lot of different audiences. Let's start there, actually, because people who are watching today might not know the extent to which you're working with different sort of entities in the community. And by Central Coast, it is Central Coast. I mean, you're
right, Southern Ventura to, really we go up to about Southern Slow right now.
Okay. So let's talk first about some of the audiences with whom you work to make those bridges happen and those relationships even stronger. So what are some of the audiences with whom you work?
I'd say about 80% of our work right now is with schools and school districts. And what that means for us is we're working with educators, we're working with students, and we're working with parents. Some of that work is separate to really help them kind of look at their experience of the school system, their role in the school system, and how they can be successful in their role. But then part of it is bringing them together so they can really talk across kind of these traditional role barriers about what do we want out of a school system, what do we want out of our specific school, and how do we realize that? How do we make our school work for all students? How do we help make sure our school is engaging all families? How do we make sure that every educator can be successful with every student? So that's a large part of our work. We're also working with other nonprofits on things like building more diverse and inclusive boards of directors, becoming more culturally proficient in their service delivery, working with government agencies on how they can really look at their work through a racial justice lens or a social justice lens and really be able to improve and expand the impact of government, the positive impact of government in our region. We're working with law enforcement to look at how they can more effectively serve communities that historically have had kind of difficult relationships with law enforcement. And so, working to provide training for police officers on things like implicit bias and how that might impact their ability to protect and serve all members of our community.
Jarrod, there's a lot of people with whom you're working right now and really are appreciating it and needing and wanting to learn more about themselves, but also bridging with others.
I think that's been, for me, one of the most exciting things about the last couple of years. When we first opened our office in 2001 and came to the community, a lot of the response was, well, we're Santa Barbara, we're the Central Coast, we're progressive, we don't have these kinds of issues. Why are you opening an office here? Shouldn't you be somewhere else that really needs you?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now in the last couple of years is we no longer have to kind of justify our existence as an organization, that people are feeling kind of a sense of urgency about issues of equity. They're seeing the value of diversity more. They want to really look at the things that get in the way of people being successful in our communities, in our schools, in our organizations. And now it's just a question of how do we do it?
One of the newer entities you're working with, I believe, are the law enforcement groups. Santa Barbara Police Department, I believe, is somebody that you're working, or a group that you're working with. And in this time, right now, in this community, boy, do we all have such an appreciation for our law enforcement, our first responders in many, many different scenarios. So we have deep appreciation for law enforcement. Can you say a little bit more about the kind of work that you're working on with the law enforcement right now?
Yeah, we're doing a couple of different things. One was actually an initiative that was launched by the police department itself, a program called Voices, where they reached out to us and several other nonprofits to say, look, we understand that we have troubled relationships with certain segments of the community, and we want to improve those relationships. We want to improve, build trust, and work through historic conflicts. And so we've been an agency that's bringing people together, folks that we work with in the community, to sit down with police officers and really start to look at, what does safety mean to police officers? What does it mean to the public? What do we want the relationship between law enforcement and the public to look like? And how do we achieve that? What have been some of the historic roles that police officers have played that have damaged the trust in the relationship with the community? And what can we do to move past those things and make changes where changes are needed to policies and practices that law enforcement engages in? And also kind of raise the awareness on the side of the community to help see police officers as people, as individuals who struggle, who have challenges themselves. And that's been really powerful. The other side of the work we do is training police officers. And so we're working with a professor at Westmont College, Dr. Carmel Saad, to provide training in implicit bias to police officers, helping them look at the unconscious biases that they may have that they may not even be aware of, but that may get in the way of them effectively serving everyone in our community.
Wow, that's really great. It says a lot about you and the work that you do, and it says a lot about the law enforcement to say, we're open to wanting to be better at connecting with our community. So it's really a wonderful thing to hear in terms of moving forward and wanting to improve.
Yeah, it does. I'd say I've been very impressed with the new chief, Lori Lunau, and her interest in really building more positive relationships with the community, in her openness to try to do things differently,
Yes.
and in her willingness to bring members of the community in to really work with officers to talk about things that can be difficult.
Right.
It's not easy for police officers to look at, or anyone really, to look at the possibility that maybe I have some biases that I'm not aware of, but they're playing out in ways that undermine what I'm trying to do.
Sure, and like you said, it's not just in law enforcement, it's with our schools, it's with all of the different entities with whom you're working. And you said something that I want to pause on too. It is difficult, part of the thing, it can be difficult, I should say. It can be difficult. And we talked today about why it's important, we talked about what it is that you do, but I'd love to have you say a little bit more about how do you go about getting these difficult conversations to go in the direction that they need to go. First, I want to say, Jarrod, you're super skilled in this. You're a really wonderful facilitator and leader in the community. So it might just come naturally for you. But I also just want to peel back a little bit on the potential techniques or strategies that you really are really thoughtful about to have these difficult conversations.
Yeah. Well, and first I'll say it's not something that initially came naturally to me, and it's definitely not just me. We have an incredible staff of talented people who are doing amazing work in often very difficult situations. Sure. And as well, we have an incredible volunteer pool that gets out there and facilitates these programs. But a lot of it is kind of first getting to what people really care about. When we work with educators, for example, one of the places we often start is getting them to talk about and think about what got them into education in the first place. Why do they care about students? What's their passion around education and working with students? And from there, we can then help them see, okay, so if this is what your passion is, let's talk about the reality of our school system. Let's look at the data and we help them notice that, the data doesn't align with their values. What they want is for every student that they work with to succeed and have an incredible experience. And what the data tells us is that a lot of students are not realizing that. And so then it's a question of, our role is not to beat up on educators or law enforcement or whoever we're working with. It's not to blame or shame anyone. It's about, okay, this is what you want. You're a good person who wants the best for our community. And yet look at what's going on. How do we reconcile that? How do we give you the tools and the skills and the knowledge and the support that you need to make sure that the outcomes you're achieving, whether you're in law enforcement or education or nonprofits, match the values and aspirations you have? And so we really come in as a partner and as a support, as opposed to as someone who's kind of rattling the cages and saying, you're doing a horrible job, you're a bad person. Right. Which is something that, in the early part of my life as an activist, that was what I did. I'd march in the streets and I'd say, you're a bad person and you're racist and all of this stuff, which doesn't necessarily, create the kind of change that we want to see. And there's a role for protest, there's a role for that kind of activism, and there are times right now, places right now where that's very needed. But what's also needed is organizations like ours who are willing to work with people in the systems to say, is is what you're achieving really what you want to achieve? And if not, how do we achieve it? Well, part of that is having difficult conversations about things that we don't like to talk about.
Right, but starting with the common value. Why are we in this together?
Exactly.
And how are we going to get there? And something that you talked about are the outcomes and impacts. And I just want to turn this to say that I know that Just Communities has had such an incredible impact on the positive in our community. Can you say a little bit about how you've seen the positive impact kind of influence in the community? How you've seen it happen?
Yeah, I'd say some of the things that we're seeing, in working, for example, with Santa Barbara Unified School District, where it's been probably our most long-term and active partner in our educational equity work. There have been historic gaps in educational opportunity and outcomes around the country for decades, really since our educational system began. And in most places around the country, those gaps are persistent and not closing. Santa Barbara Unified has made incredible gains in improving outcomes for Latino students, for English learners, for first-generation college-bound students, and really is outperforming the nation in a lot of areas. In virtually every area of academic achievement, and including things like test scores and graduation weights, but also things like discipline, we're seeing positive gains of 10, 20, 30, 100, 200% since we started working with the district in 2005. They're doing amazing work. There's a lot more work that needs to happen, but they also know it and they're bought into it.
Yeah.
So we've seen the data change. We're also seeing more people talking about these issues. When we opened our office in 2001, there was one gay-straight alliance in all of Santa Barbara County in the schools. And there's now, last count, there was about 14 or 15. Started by graduates of our youth program, started by educators who've gone through a program called Safe Schools that we do in collaboration with Pacific Pride Foundation and now also with the Trans Central Coast. So we're seeing kind of changes in the outcomes, we're seeing changes in the infrastructure. We're also seeing just kind of a cultural change. When we first approached Santa Barbara Unified actually in 2002 about doing work on achievement gaps, the response was one of, well, we're doing everything we can, the problem is the parents. Those parents don't care. They don't value education. People aren't saying that anymore. The districts and educators are looking at how do we engage parents? How do we work with them as partners? We know that they want the best for their children. So maybe we've got to shift some things in terms of how we work with parents. Wow,
that is really great. You've outlined some of the impacts you've seen in different entities with whom you work, and one that I know that you've been working with closely, but recently is Sanabria Bonita, a dual language, dual immersion, I think is what you're working on there. Excuse me, how has that work unfolded for you? How is that going? Do you see the trajectory continuing there?
Yeah, so again, a lot of our work is not prescriptive. We don't come into a school or any organization and say, here are the 10 things you need to do.
Right.
Instead, we work with people to really kind of equip them with new knowledge and skills and tools, help them kind of identify what are the challenges or problems as well as the opportunities, and then have them develop plans for change. And so 2 years ago, Sanabria Bonita opened their first dual language immersion program at the elementary level. And where that came from was actually in, it was 2011, a group of educators from Sanabria Bonita came through our Educator Institute. And their action plan that they developed was around parent engagement. And so a year later, with our support, they put on a one-day parent engagement workshop for kind of a day-long workshop. They had 100 people, 30 parents, students, educators, elected officials, and so on, and really looked at what are the things that are inhibiting or preventing the success of students in our community, and what are the things that are working and helping. And out of that came this idea of a dual language immersion program, and so that was back in 2012. And then it took about 4 or 5 years of a lot of people in the community really working to make that happen, but they were able to launch it. And the program's been an overwhelming success. I mean, there's wait lists to get in now.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for sharing that path of that success story that's going to continue for sure. I just want to switch gears a little bit and talk about you and your leadership. Jarrod, you're clearly a leader in our community, Central Coast, coast-wide. How do you define leadership?
I think to me, it's a leader is someone who can really tap into the gifts and strengths of others and help support them in employing those gifts and strengths towards something important, something bigger than themselves. And so that's, I think what I try to do is, how do I really provide support to the people around me who have incredible skills and knowledge and an expertise, and create a foundation where they can put that into practice.
And you do that for sure. And you also, I know, cultivate your own leadership in terms of really honing, continuing to practice, really thinking about it. Is there something that you've recently read, something that you would share with the audience, something that you read, heard, maybe attended, that you're saying, yes, this is something that I'm really thinking about in terms of my leadership?
Oh gosh. I think for me, it's a constant state of trying to see myself as just not finished yet. And so it's what are all the different things I can read? What are all the different ways I can reflect on my current performance, the way we currently do things, and constantly be open to the idea that we could do things better, that I can do things better, and then ask questions. So I'm always reading books around the issues that we address. One of them that I've been reading lately is The Broken Ladder: How Inequality Affects the Way We Live, Think, and Die, something like that. And it's really kind of looking at the psychological impacts of inequality on people, and how that prevents us really from achieving change. And so, at Just Communities, then it's about, well, how do we start to incorporate those kinds of that kind of thinking into the work we do to help other people gain that kind of a lens.
I love that. You're just a lifelong learner, Jarrod.
Absolutely.
You can see it from the time you were a child till now even. You're continually improving. You said you're not there yet, so you're going to continue to grow. It's a growth mindset for sure. Final word, Jarrod. What message might you have for our community out there who are watching today, who've heard your message, and I know that you're with the community often. Do you have a message for our community viewers today?
I think I would just say, we've as everyone I think knows, we've been hit by a lot of tragedy lately in our community, between the Thomas Fire and the flood, the mudslides. And you asked initially about our vision of a community where all people are connected, respected, and valued. And I'd say on the one hand, I've been incredibly inspired to see how our communities responded and pulled together, and I think revealed a level of connectedness that I think oftentimes we don't see. And at the same time, one of the things that we've seen is that we still struggle to make sure that all members of our community are connected. And I've been really proud of Santa Barbara County for the ways in which they've really worked to reach out in Spanish to Spanish-speaking members of our community, engage those members of the community, and also noticed that they've needed a lot of help. We've been doing a lot of work to support them through our Language Justice Initiative. Lena Moran in our office has incredible leadership, is coordinating volunteer translators from across the country, volunteer interpreters from across the Central Coast to help out. And so what I'd say, to our community is I hope we can kind of really hold on to the good that we've seen come out of this, while at the same time recognizing that there's things we need to work on to make sure that when this happens again, no one in our community is unsafe because of lack of access around language or immigration status, or whatever it is. That there's still parts of our community that we need to continue to do a better job of engaging and holding.
Jarrod, thank you so much for the messages today and the work that you do, your leadership. You really do make such a difference in our community for the lives of people, of individuals, and you're so intentional about what you do and how you do it. I just want to say thank you, and thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools. Thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Local Leaders.